Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. Happy Thursday. JK, it's not really a cure for hallucinations for people anyway. Talking about AI hallucinations and have we found something that actually works on this? I don't know if it's microdosing or what, but we've got an interesting gang of people to talk about our subjects for today. Let me quickly introduce you to them. We have John Swartz, who's been up all night with the latest Silicon Valley news. Garima Bajpai, our good friend Guy Currier, and of course the Dean Mike Vizard. Ladies and gentlemen, let's jump right into our first here, a cure for AI hallucinations anyway. Shades of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Mike, what are we talking about?
All right. Well, there's one of these companies out there that specializes in AI, and they've been mainly focused on infrastructure optimization, but they put out an announcement saying that they have a framework now where you can go into these models and look for the variables that indicate that this is where, for DevOps folks, it's kind of like a feature flag, that this is where some sort of effort has been made to suppress an answer, or is the root cause of an issue where the LLM is just plain old hallucinating. I don't know exactly how this is going to work out, but it's fascinating to me because it takes on an issue that we've been struggling with forever now. And part of the problem with these models is I have to go in and retrain them, or I got to give them additional data to fix these hallucinations. And that's a lot of effort. And these guys are saying now we can fix this in minutes. Guy, I know you looked at this. What's your take here? Have we finally come up with an answer here, or is this kind of just maybe wishful thinking?
It's not wishful thinking. It's a real answer. Is it the total answer? That's really doubtful. So let's talk about what this is. It's a really neat trick. So the way models work is they work in layers of processing, the famous neural net. And what CTGT is doing, which is the company founded, by the way, by two, 20-something wonderkins out of UCSD. Go UCSD. So what it does is what they're doing is sort of inspecting the inference as it goes and finding the layer where the hallucination so-called occurs. Now, I think there's a little bit of sleight of hand going on here because to a large degree, what they were working on was programmed bias or censorship. In other words, models that for not through the training and through the source data, but essentially through tweaking of the model, won't answer certain prompts or will answer with hallucinations. So the neat trick is, they start with this sort of listening post that sees how the inference is going through every of these, 1,000 million, whatever layers in the model. And they are repeatedly hitting the model with prompts that they know or believe very strongly will produce the bias. And it's almost like looking and seeing what layers is going off and lighting up most often when they do that, and then making adjustments to confirm. So when they amp up that layer, does it get worse? When they lower that layer, does it get better? And that is a process that takes minutes because they only have to run, a certain number of prompts and do it very fast. And it's relatively mathematically defined how they do this whole thing. So that in the end, when at step 3, they make an adjustment, now you have an improved model. The sleight of hand I referred to is if you have a bad training set, then if the training set, the data set is not curated, which these are huge data sets and they often are not, that is a source for hallucination and bias and so forth. Famously in computer vision, where facial recognition doesn't work properly because of the training data set. So I'm not sure I see how this applies in the first instance, but it's still a really big announcement, kind of like DeepSeek, where you're saying, wow, there's a whole lot that you can do without having to throw 1,000, 1,000,000 GPUs and months of training time. And I think just to put this in perspective, we have been saying two things all along here. These are early days for AI. We don't really understand how it works or the implications. Here's an example. A neat trick somebody figured out to quickly make models work better. And the second one is, and this is my favorite always, human supervision and human intervention is critical in using AI well. And now we're talking about human intervention to improve models. I realize it's all programmatically done, but the identification of likely hallucinations is confirmed by humans. So this is really worth studying and looking at.
Yeah, I also want to jump in here because Guy has mentioned some positive sides of this announcement. Being a DevOps practitioner, I always find interesting ways to see and challenge ourselves that what can be our next bet from a DevOps perspective. So I see there are core components which Guy has mentioned that how do we make our models perfect. Then there is a middleware which is in making, which is basically when you're prompting your system, how well you actually get the response, how do you monitor it, how do you infer it, and how do you interfere in the output. So that's the middle layer which probably will be in making, and a lot of DevOps people are looking at it from an observability perspective. And the third aspect is the top layer, which is observing, because there will be residual hallucinations. Nobody has understood these models enough to claim that all hallucinations will be gone through this announcement. I think there is a controlled approach, and interoperability is kind of also being challenged here, because explaining AI decisions still remain difficult, right? So there's a lot more to added to it. If you see from a challenge perspective, like how do you cut down the over reliance of automation, for example. For in this scenario, there will also be evolving threats, right? I mean, people are also looking at better ways to do new attacks, and the attack vector is also broadening, right? And last point, which I think Guy also touched upon, is error versus intent, right? I mean, we have to be very careful when we deploy such kind of technology, because human in the lead is having an essential kind of element to it when we are dealing with emerging technology. So I mean, there is no silver bullet. Again, it's hard to separate the accidental from intentional misinformation.
Am I the only one who sees the irony in trying to figure out a Chinese-based AI and trying to get them to remove the censorship?
I don't think there's irony in that. I think it's a damn good thing.
That the censorship, or that we're trying to remove it?
That we're trying to remove it.
Let me use the tired old phrase low-hanging fruit. It seemed plausible, surely, to these two researchers that examining DeepSeek would likely produce easily found bias that they could then correct for. Remember, these biases, they call it censorship. I think that's correct. There are layers in the model where those biases have sort of essentially been placed by human beings, and they are finding them and neutralizing them. And I think that it's not really ironic to me. It is a sensible way to go about the research. And it just so happens that China right now is an authoritarian country, while capitalistic, and tries to control information famously. I don't think they exactly deny it. So there you go.
They're not the only ones. But
true.
Let me...
It could be one of the worst ones, though. I do want to say that from a government standpoint.
It's all relative. But let me make a distinction here. I think there's a difference between human intentionally introduced bias / censorship, right? Such as in DeepSeek, not talking about Tiananmen Square, for instance, right? Versus some of the hallucinations, just where the frig did they make this up from, that we saw in a lot of the AI models, more earlier on. I don't see them quite as much anymore, but I still remember when asking it to write a bio my own bio as a test, and it would just flat out make up stuff.
So that's the sleight of hand I was referring to, Alan, which is that their test cases and their proof of concept have to do with intentionally placed bias. But my view, my analysis of this is that the exact same technique could be used to find hallucinations. When you have a set of prompts that produce hallucinations, you don't actually have to care whether it was intentional or not. You can still find that layer in the model that shines when you run those prompts, and you can still make those adjustments to the vectors to produce a better result. I think Garima's point is a perfect point, which is that, well, I'll rephrase if you don't mind, Garima, which is this is a step. It's going to have a reaction, and then we'll need further steps. And this will be development, just like every tech wave we've ever had.
I'm excited about the whole idea that I could actually use an open source model now with some level of confidence that the answers are going to be right, because I have some level of control over that. Because historically, up until now, we've all been dependent upon the AI model provider to put some level of governance or some level of control in that. And frankly, I'd like to see them all get out of that business and all of us just take responsibility for how we're going to use these LLMs ourselves.
The feature validation part is very interesting because this brings dynamic control. If let's say our compliance and regulatory, and I mentioned it over and over again, that if they wake up and they catch up this emerging technology wave, there's a lot which can be done through this dynamic control. And if you bring observability and the prompt engineering in the loop, I think there's a lot of more trust getting built up for these technologies.
So the problem, though, is, I mean, look, if it hallucinates writing my bio, I know my bio and I can easily tell it's a hallucination. Unfortunately, we've got a problem with fake news in this world. As it is, most of the population, at least here in the US, can't tell the difference between fake news, conspiracy theories, and tinfoil hats, right? They're going to have a hell of a hard time figuring out what's real or not that the AI is spitting out to them. So, Mike, to your point, either you trust nothing or trust everything, or, how do you know what to trust? And so putting it on a personal responsibility thing, it's your responsibility to make sure the AI is not BSing you, is I think, going to be beyond us.
Yeah. And this is kind of a little peripheral to the issue, but I mean, I remember seeing a report in Rock, and the amount of bias that's evident there, bordering on blatant anti-Semitism, and it's actually getting worse. At the same time, Musk talks about starting a third party. But I mean, this is the one. Just going back to hallucinations, though, I think it's very encouraging news, a potential game changer. I mean, one of the headaches, lingering deterrents or obstacles in the wider use or trust of AI has been this case. And anything that addresses it, I think, is positive. And so I'm very encouraged by it.
Does this just work on DeepSeek, or this will work on any model in AI?
Well, it'll work on a neural net model. Not every model is a neural net in the world, and no doubt we will start experimenting further. I mean, in the origin of AI, it wasn't always a neural net. It's also has to be a feed-forward neural net, probably, and some neural nets are recursive, et cetera. So I don't want to get too wonky, but the essential idea of monitoring the propagation, because that's kind of what it is, of the prompt through the model, it would have to be adjusted, I think, for other types than feed-forward neural nets. But that's, again, more development for later. For now, it just applies to feed-forward neural nets, which would be most of the generative AI models, if not all of them.
Common ones we use. Mike, I almost wish we had our friend Chris Blask on today's show and hear about how his civic-minded AI, or whatever it's called.
It's really, I'll tell you what's ironic. Sorry, at the end of the day, brands, quote unquote, and people, we still are those are the ones we are going to be turning to and relying on, because the systems are too complicated. And no, Mike, I don't think we can do it ourselves. If we can, we'll be using some kind of open source tool that does it for us. And that means an open source organization that we're trusting. I mean, it still all comes back around to human supervision, intervention, human interaction.
I would like to distinguish between ourselves and the definition thereof. There's a difference between ourselves, as in you and me, and a retailer who has some AI capability can go in and control this stuff themselves now. And I think from an enterprise perspective, this is huge. I mean, it's not about us individuals, but it's me as a company. I now have some level of confidence, a lot higher than I did before, of what may or may not be in that AI model. So from that perspective, I think this is going to drive a lot more AI models into production than anything I've seen lately.
I don't want to sound too negative about this whole thing, but I think one point which I'm trying to make here is AI is becoming like a drug. The more you use it, more you get addicted to it. And think about my 10-year-old kid in the house who has hands on ChatGPT. I just want to kind of ensure that we understand that human accountability is of course required, but there is also concern about how do we use this technology, who is behind how we regulate this, right? I mean, Guy, I interrupted you, sorry for that.
What does it do to a 10-year-old, right? So it's the Wall-E syndrome, Wall-E, from the movie. Mike, I think I sent you an article last week I was reading. Are we going to lose the ability to write? Right? Because we're relying on AI to write for us. Are we going to lose the ability to code when AI is doing all the coding? Are we destined to be corpuscles floating around in some servo chair and our AIs take care of us?
No. So think about the history of music, okay? Around 1900, Kurt Vonnegut had a great statement about this. I wish I could remember. It was so clever. It basically said that in every town and every village in the year 1900, there were all kinds of people with middling to fair ability to play instruments, because they would get together once a week and they would play and people were entertained. And the radio killed that, because everybody could just beam in expertly produced music. So has the overall musical ability average or median musical ability of the US or the world population gone down? Yes. But that was a shift. That was a change. So good writers will still be good writers who are human beings who may very well use AI, but will be responsible for their final output, and it will either work or not work. And there will be fewer.
Tell you that there are days when I consider that, a lot of the people who have been filing copy, I'm not even sure they know how to write.
This is also true. On that note, we got to take a break.
Yes. Mike, yes.
We'll come back. We're good. Speaking of this whole subject, we're going to continue with teaching AI to teachers. You're watching TechStrong, gang.